Hi, it's RJ Nestor, business and executive coach here. Today I wanted to share a little bit about my content creation process and how that works in Rome research. I'm just going to show a segment of it that really illuminates how the replace with original and replace with text and alias can make it really powerful to move from one draft to the next with whatever you're creating, whether that be something you're writing, creative writing, or a blog post, or if you're creating videos or something like that. I think this is a really neat tool to make use of that. Just a little background here. My training is actually as a composer, and I'm also a writer. I've written musicals, and so I've had a lot of experience creating content over the years. And a few years ago, I created something I call BOMR for my coaching clients, which is brainstorm, organize, make, and refine. Sort of a universal method for any kind of content creation. And it's a structure. And the only real important thing for what we're talking about here right now is to know that when you're in a brainstorm mode, you don't edit. You gather, you organize. You don't organize things. You just get them together, and you brainstorm and you brain dump and you do all the things you need to do to get everything out there in front of you. And then the organize step, that's when you edit. That's when you order things. That's when you sort through them. So that's what BOMR is. And I only reference that because Rome is the best tool I have ever encountered for creativity and productivity in general, but also for that specific type of process. When you gather everything together, then you go through and edit and organize it. Then you approach it again and draft it. The block references and the way that those work make that super, super powerful. So just so you have an idea of what to expect in this video, these are the features I'll be highlighting. This is super important to me to kind of clarify for you what features I'm going to illuminate. So first of all, pages as tags. Second of all, block references. The idea of being able to focus on block and use the sidebar, as well as copy block references, or copy block ref as it appears in the menu. And then, as I told you already, replace with original, the swap blocks only part of that, and replace with text and alias. Using all of those, this will illuminate how those work in this. So I think the first important thing for me is when I'm creating a new piece of content, like say, for instance, this is a blog post that I'm hoping I'll have up today or tomorrow about how I use a daily agenda in my productivity routine. I've had a video, actually, if you probably saw the video a few days ago if you're subscribed to my channel. So the idea here is that when I create one of these things to create the blog post or the novel or whatever it is, I want all of the material that I have to either live on that page or be linked to that page. So I just have the one page that's built with that title. Now, of course, there are concepts and other things that I may bring in here as I brainstorm onto the page. I may reference in from other places. But the idea is that if I have an idea when I'm somewhere else, I can tag this page. I know it'll show up here. And also, if I need to preview or review what my drafts are, I know that this page is where I can come to find it very easily. So the fewer, top level titles you have, the better as far as that goes. It makes those linked references easier. And this is what's cool about having it on one page, is that it doesn't make it more cumbersome simply because you can very easily focus on one individual block on the page by just choosing focus on block. Now it's as though that lives on its own page. And what I love to do when I'm creating one draft to the next is I open the previous draft in my sidebar, and then I focus on the draft I'm working on in the main place here. And that way everything's over here. I can drag it over as I need to. Reference it as I need to, and it'll be there. It's just like working on two individual pages, but when it's all said and done, it's all living in the same place and very easy to find. Further, if you wanted to use, and I don't think I mentioned that I'm going to talk about filters, but if you wanted to use filters for something like this, you could absolutely come in here and filter out, down to just things called a pass. Just for the record, not to dive. This is not about my BOMR technique, but I call individual iterations within BOMR a pass. So the first pass is a brainstorm pass in this case. Second pass is an organized pass. These things are not necessary to have on there. This just gives me tools when I use pages as references, or pages as tags in this case. That gives me the ability to filter out things that I don't want to see. So I can go filter straight down to the brainstorm. I can filter down to the organized pass or the second pass, or however I want to do that. It just gives me a lot of flexibility when I use those pages as tags to highlight that. So either focus on block with the sidebar or filtering things can get you down to what you need to see on that page. So, and the last thing I'll note here is if I did have a larger scale project that I was working on, I wouldn't like have one novel all living on the same page. I would have the novel, and on that page would be a place where I can organize other pages. And those other pages might be the chapter level. And within the chapter level, maybe there's a scene level, or maybe a chapter is just one page like this, depending on what the way you work. With my own novel that I'm working on here in Rome, I have the chapter, and then within the chapters, the scenes are the things that would look like this. The scenes are where I would do my iterations. And then I would organize those scenes on the chapter pages and organize the chapters on the novel pages, or novel page. So it wouldn't be one massive page you'd be working on. But you'd kind of create a hierarchical network as you work down through those things. So that's why I like to have everything live on the same page here, is it just keeps it all in a predictable place. Now, very briefly, I want to talk about what it means to when you're doing a brainstorming pass. So when I'm doing a brainstorming pass, I am pulling in references from elsewhere. Like for instance, here I drew in a block reference from my course, Powerful Task Management and Rome Research, about the agenda, which doesn't tell me a whole bunch here, but it reminds me of what I want to talk about in this blog post. And I also brought in my YouTube video that I made. I mentioned about the daily agenda, so that I have that here as a reference point. And of course, most of this I just kind of wrote out how I wanted the structure, but I could make these block references. I could pull a block reference in here to work in this space. So this is not about editing. This is just gathering. This is getting things organized. Now, to the meat. Now here we are 7 minutes in. This is to the core of what I want to talk about in this video. I want to show you how you can use the replace with original and the replace with text and alias to get a really nifty workflow going as you go from one pass to the next pass. So if I open this brainstorm in the sidebar here, and then I focus on my block here. So now I'm looking at the second pass block here, while I have the first pass open over here in the sidebar. So I'm closing this down to make sure I don't forget anything as I do this. Good. Looks like I'm on my journey here correctly. So let's imagine, and I'm not going to do this in deep detail because I'm going to get this sorted out myself later. I don't want to bore you with all of this. But let's say I wanted to move this calendar processing material into the second draft over here. What I would do, if I decided I wanted to just pull the whole thing forward to the new draft, is I would highlight calendar processing. I would right click and choose copy block refs. So it's going to copy every reference here, and it's going to bring it over here to the new draft. So now, in this draft, what currently shows is all of these in the old draft or the original, and all of these over here are references to those. However, of course, what I want to be able to do is change the text over here, so that I can, as I draft, I'm progressively creating the newer material here. So what I could do is I could replace all of this with text and alias. So now I have the link that still takes me back to the original blocks over here, but I can still change all of the text that's associated with that. And this works fine. There's no problem with this, if that's what you want to do. What I don't like about it is that when I go to copy to the next draft, I've got all these aliases, all these little asterisks hanging out, plus the text that's the link in the asterisk. So that comes across when I copy and paste to the next level if I don't carefully do this with each one, and I don't want to carefully do it with each one. So instead, and I'm going to undo what I just did there. So now these are back to being just the whole thing's the block reference. Instead, I do this in 2 steps. I copy all of this, and I choose Replace with Original. So now, these are the original blocks, and these are the references. So if I do that, now you'll see when I click to see where the references are, it's actually going to pull me back and show me where that fits over here. So now I get to see where this include calendar events, how this, where this references, what's referencing this back there. Now there's one problem with this. If I were to start changing this text, calendar processing and how I do it, well, now because this is a reference, this also changes the original material back here and how I do it. So I'm going to undo that. What I do next is I copy all of this, or highlight all of this, and replace this with the text and alias. And so now that this has the text and alias, when I change this text in the second pass, it will not affect this text in the original, which is really useful for me because I often go back to the same material to generate it for something in a new format. Like, as I already said, this is in the course Powerful Task Management and Rome Research. This is also a YouTube video. I'm now turning it into a blog post. So I want to have the ability to go back into that material and see what my evolution of thought was, see what things were adapted or left out in taking it into the new format. This allows me to see that journey back through to, you know, what my thoughts were. And when I change this and I say, look for calendar gaps, which is just a rewording of that, that now no longer changes this text over here, but I can still see the journey back to what that original thing was. And of course, if I'm over here, I can use this to jump to the next draft and how that worked there. So that's the way I do that to make sure I can still see that journey. A couple of things to note about this process. First of all, you know, I may want to go, in fact, I probably would want to go on into pass 3. And we'll call this a make pass. Normally, I actually would just call it a draft. And incidentally, I have those as bold and as second level headers just for the sake of being able to see them a little better on the page. So now if I focused on this block, sorry, I should have opened the other one first. If I open this one in the sidebar and then focus on this block, now if I draw this stuff forward, copy block refs, bring it all over, do what I did a moment ago, replace with original, and then over here, replace with text and alias. Now, this stuff here has both the references to where it was in the 2 previous drafts. This over here in the second pass now only refers back to the third pass, but that's okay because I still have my references that shows me both things. It shows me the whole journey back to where I was in the original concept in the brainstorming, and also into the organized pass. Do note that if I decide to cut some material, say this little chunk goes out here, it doesn't delete the original stuff. It takes you back here. It's a little unsightly because that alias that I used here is going to show up now as an asterisk in a bracket with the text because it's no longer a link. But I kind of like that because this allows me to see at a glance immediately what material I decided to cut as I was moving through the process. So if I'm looking back through my journey, I can look here, I can see what was cut as I went forward very easily and readily. The one last thing to note, and I call this using a pivot block. So if my original thing here included, let's just say for a moment, that this included a reference here to something else, another block here in my notes. Let's just say blog post about agenda. That's a rather silly thing to bring in, but that'll work just fine. So let's say this itself was a reference here in the original brainstorming pass. And let's imagine now, move it to the sidebar, and I'll focus on my original, or on my organized pass. What would happen if the original here, which is right here, blog post about agenda, if this itself were a reference, and then I block reference it and bring it over here, what happens now when I take this and swap it with the original? This is so delightful. When I swap this block over, you saw there was a little shift over in this one. This now is not, this is still a reference because it's still, this one is now the one that refers to here. And this, when I do this replace with text and alias, I'm going to get an alias that brings me to here. But the reference here, that still takes me back into the original place that I drew this from. So there it is, all back to a morning assessment from today. And this one, if I jump to this block, this one takes me to the second pass. So this is now what I call a pivot block. This still has the reference to the original source material in it, but it also still ties into the flow of this. And this, by the by, also, I think I said this, also references back to the original material. So you're going to have, these things that continue to reference back. If you want to be able to change this text, now that it has the reference point here over to keep it into the flow with this, all you have to do is take this and turn it into just plain old text. It'll still connect to where it is in the brainstorming. It just doesn't connect to the original material. That's fine because the pivot block here does. So you can see the journey that goes back to there, and you can still, from that original, you can find your way back to where the source material was. So you can see why I wanted to get to this material quickly, because it took me 10 minutes to talk about just this process. But the point is here, it does take, maybe cumulatively over the course of writing a blog post, maybe 5-6 more minutes to each time I bring a reference forward to click, do the text, replace with original, then go back to what was the original before and make it a text and alias. That takes a little longer. But for me, that process of being able to see the evolution of one pass to the next for future reference is unbelievably useful. Now, of course, if you're in a hurry and you just want to use what my little tip here for keeping on the same page and doing a pass and then another pass and then another pass, and you don't want to actually reference it, you just copy and paste it over and change it, that's fine. You can still look back and see. If it's something simple, you won't have any trouble with that. But say you're writing a larger, like a series of blog posts, or you're writing a novel and there's a lot of world building that you're drawing in from, being able to see those connections, being able to quickly jump back through and see where things are coming from is really, really valuable. So for me, the time spent doing that is not anything to be concerned about, because it makes it so much easier to see what that journey of those things were. Now, when I go to drafts, you can see here I actually use versions for this. I've been talking for 18 minutes. I'm not going to go into that in this video, but I will do that in a future video. I don't always use versions for drafts, but I do think there's something nice about with a version. It makes it so that the second version replaces the first version, so you can't even access that first version in the graph if whatever's in that first version essentially no longer exists until you click back to that first version. That's kind of nice for quality control when you're making drafts. The things I want you to take from this are, 1, Roam Research makes generating and iterating content an absolute breeze. So for a system like mine, BOMR, that relies on those passes, it's fantastic. Tagging allows you to filter specifically. If you want to filter to things that are passes or a particular pass number, you can do that so easily. Focusing on a block using the sidebar makes pulling from one pass to the next one very, very easy. And you saw all of that talk of replacing with the original, and the text and alias is a great way to track that evolution of your content. One quick little pitch for my upcoming course, Your Road to Rome. What I do in that course is similar to what I'm doing here. I introduce new features, but do it in the context of a workflow. So each module of the course introduces a few new features, shows you how they work, shows how they work with each other in a sample workflow, and then prompts you to consider how you could find uses for that in your own workflow. And that third component over the course becomes your capstone project of discovering what your unique needs and workflow within Rome Research will be, using those features that are very powerful, but sometimes you don't know exactly what to do with them. This course will help illuminate that and prompt you to coach you to discover what those needs are for yourself. So if that's something you're interested in, go over to yourroadtorome.com or just click the link that's down in the description. That's going to come out late October, early November-ish here in 2020, so in about 3 weeks or so. And I'm very excited about that because I think it's something that will help a lot of people who are seeing the power of Rome but not understanding how to implement it for themselves. So hopefully this is helpful for you today. And if this is the sort of thing you like, go over and put in your email, and I'll send you an email when your Road to Rome releases.